Welcome to Future Living Lab Podcast, your place to find conversations with architecture professor, industry professionals, and instructors. We are your hosts, I'm Breen.
And Matt.
And today we're going to be discussing something really important, renderings, which play a vital role in architecture projects and drawing representations.
Today our guest to discuss renderings is Brandon Bergem. Brandon is best known for his work at OISO with Jeffrey Garcia. He makes incredible renders. Brandon did his undergraduate in environmental design at the University of Manitoba and then completed his master's in architecture here at the University of Toronto. Now he works with Jeffrey at Office in Search Of, where he does the renders. And now for our discussion with Brandon Bergem.
So, Brandon, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. It's great to have you here today.
Really excited to have you today.
My pleasure to be here.
So today we're talking about the art of architectural renderings. So you're a art viz specialist, I guess. How
Sure.
would you put your title for?
I suppose art viz artist slash designer slash no
Slash digital artist. So I know you from Art 100, and what stood out to me in a way, I remember your work when you presented to it at us at the beginning of the semester when I was in my first year. You showed us all your incredible renders from your thesis and from your work at OISO with Jeffrey Garcia. And since then I found some of your other renders for client work online, and you've shared some with me since we've been talking. But renders are really your bread and butter. Your art is bread and butter. They're incredible. So I just want to start off. Why are renders so important in architecture? Why are they so valuable, and why do you use them?
I think when you're in the world of architecture, you become very accustomed to the representations, what a floor plan is, what an isometric is, what an exploded diagram is. These are all very useful tools for working through design, unpacking design, thinking in different ways. But to the general public, that can be very abstract. Even, like in house design, to kind of walk through the floor plan to someone. Like designers, we might be able to kind of like visualize, extrapolate information and kind of infer things, but that's not really true of a lot of people. So architectural renderings are often there's a very accessible way for someone to understand the design. And I think also when it comes to professional practice, it's often a place where ideas really get tested. So you might be an architect that's like doing a master plan, and things are not always so completely designed. There's kind of a sensibility about what it should be, and for art viz artists, we'll say discipline that people get to because they're from design and they're able to kind of take leaps in what an architect might be in their design process and put it on the stage and kind of see what things are to be when it's just a broad master plan that doesn't actually have any buildings designed to it, but when you show a public of like what this master plan might be, and the townhouses are designed, the cladding isn't really there. There's maybe a loose sensibility of what the landscape plan might be, but no one's really actually sat down to pen paper and figured out where every single tree's supposed to go. So it's a kind of way to bring the kind of future imagination of a project kind of like a little bit closer and accessible.
Yeah, so there's a lot to say about communicating the project.
For sure.
The view of the project further down the line in the future, as well as informing people who are outside of architecture. But it's also a huge skill, and there's a lot of artistry involved. So, and I know in your renders as well, there's often a narrative or moments of where the artistry is shining, not just in a way of communication, but also just to show the potential beyond what we'll just end up seeing, but also the potential of the buildings and the artistry of the buildings and the environment.
I think even for me, like renders personally are something I'm very interested in. So even in group projects, I'm the one who end up doing the renders. However, there's a really important questions, and I think you could be the right person to answer it. Is it's something really personal as well, like a personal style of representation. However, there's always this debate that how realistic and how stylistic stylistic the render should be in order to communicate. Like, where do you find that balance?
It's like a big conversation of how it's easy. It's also very easy to be too seduced by the image that, when I talk about like I'm extrapolating something that's not really fully designed, and now it's like kind of on paper as being something and might change 10 more times before shovels are in the ground, and then even then might change some more. Really allow it or really understanding what the role of the image is. And it is a curious thing where, I take the approach of images that I get more excited about the kind of general suitability of the image, like what the mood is, the like atmosphere is. And, like it's usually the architects who criticize, like, oh, if I'm showing it too precise now, the client, like, it might not be the exact like foreground, but they're also still the ones that are telling me, like, oh, the like baseboard reveal has to be 2.5 inches, and like between the metal plates of my cladding, like there's this kind of like shadow reveal. They're the ones that are like marking up images with all these very, very precise requirements of what they actually want it to be, whether or not, for better or worse, this is like valued to be so explicit about these things at any given time. But I do think renderings are a valuable design tool. When I was a student, I was very into rendering as a student, and I would often kind of like be evaluating the things I was working on in an image as I was working through it. It wasn't the step where I've locked in my floor plan, I've locked in the massing, and like now it's the step where I am going to do my final rendering. I'm kind of doing like little renderings along the way, just kind of get a sense of what things were supposed to be. Even when before I came to grad school, I was working on office for several years at Winnipeg. And I think that was like a big value I had there, where I was when I first started, there were like a couple of projects where it's like they were at full contract documents, and it was like, let's do some renderings for some awards. And it was like literally building up from like very, very precise floor plans to get to some clear renderings. But it was a firm that really appreciated like things being a little bit looser, a little bit more about the concept, and not so much exactly like where the door is, how tall the door is. Like, let's make where the door maybe has like a notch to somewhere. Like, let's get rid of the notch. It's really about the general feel about things. And I should say, like, the partner used to do a lot of rendering, but he got too busy. So kind of I was in my foot in the door, like making images a lot, because I was kind of one who knew how to do it, even if I was not like, super great at it yet. But in time, I kind of got shifted in the design process, where that kind of occurrence where the renderings and the design happens kind of simultaneously. You're testing things along the way, evaluating decisions kind of on the go. They were kind of happening all the time. Working on a project where there was like a core 10 fit cladding that like wrapped around a spiral tower, and there were like 30 options of like the spacing of the cladding, how deep they were, did they kind of like radiate and profile, and it was like every version was rendered out. Not like a super polished rendering, but it was more than like kind of drawing on an elevation how it looked, especially because it's like a round building, so you look at it in elevation and like it gets all kind of distorted because it gets flattened out. So like anything, every representation has its role, and always useful to have a kind of like expectations about what that means, and kind of curb those expectations, because at the end of the day, all forms of architecture representation is just eventually to get us to a building.
Yeah, that's really interesting that rendering is part of the iterative process as well, that you use them throughout the projects, because for us, at least as students, we have also quite short time frames where, at least from what I've seen, we do the concept, the 3D model, and then all the drawings, the line drawings, and the renderings just come at the step. But especially when you're getting into the details, like you're talking about the the cladding and the trim, then yeah, I can definitely see how renders can be really important in that context. It's just the feel of spaces as well. Right?
I think just like a little follow to that would be, you mentioned that there's like two aspects of it, like all the kind of different renders are important, and you were talking about just like precise rendering that kind of communicate every small little details of like, I don't know, materials and even the measurements and everything. But then there's also the kind of more abstract version, which I personally am more interested in, to just show that this is what the feel of the building is. To you personally, what is more fun to work with?
I guess it's there's a kind of unspoken question is sometimes people like speak to renderings about me as if there's kind of like style. Some images do I think have a kind of the kind of atmosphere is a little bit more cranked up. Some are a little bit more neutral. Sometimes this is what's getting told to me by clients is these renderings are for like the public or these renderings are for marketing. There's all these kind of caveats about like what a render is for, but I'm still kind of making renders that generally I think all kind of fit together within our portfolio, that they're not discordant because they fall into any one of these categories. I'm not one to do, I've done, and as a few versions of renderings where they're very, there's more like overlays, it's more Photoshop, and maybe like kind of have a kind of more painterly sensibility. As in different competitions we do, sometimes we'll kind of break out to the kind of more, just generally what I call everything I do, then the kind of photoreal, even though I don't think of what we do as being particularly photoreal, and I compare it to people that are being very, very photoreal. But I do get fascinated about the potentials for images to have kind of cinematic feel more than totally documentary feel. I also, because I've made so many images, I get more excited about like very, very like niche technical challenges and how to like achieve it in a render that go way beyond like just making a building's materials look like brick and that they have to feel like the three-dimensional brick. For example, just recently in the office, we're working through a project up north in Calwood where it's like really gravel roads. People drive ATVs and snowmobiles. And for an image, it was like trying to make a three-dimensional road that had like tire tracks and snow that revealed gravel, but also there was a mix of snowmobile tracks, and that the snow captured this kind of particular quality of light when it gets very hazy in a snowstorm that was like reflected in the more scraped parts of the road. And sometimes these become very like fun technical challenges to try and capture a very, very specific type of mood in an image that is like very, very fine grained to try and get there. And those are the things that I'll say kind of excite me, because it's usually in pursuit of some sort of image that isn't just the kind of normal. The sun is out, kids are happy, everyone's holding hands, and it's all sunshines and rainbows in an image, because this particular context really benefited to representing a climate that is all very common and not, it's like very part of like kind of days like from living in a remote community like that.
Yeah, you talk about all the details that maybe the average person won't see, but especially in architecture, people notice all the effort put into the different textures, and there's so much more work that has to go into that when making it in 3D as compared to just overlaying some images in Photoshop, for example. So yeah, I mean, time-wise, it's so much more effort, and I don't even know if architects fully understand how deep down these rabbit holes that 3D artists can go.
I think in some sense they do, because a lot of our clients are familiar with these tools. Like, it's not that internally in these offices, they're not doing renderings themselves with more approachable softwares like Enscape, but have a kind of cap in how far you can take it, or at least in the way they're like wanting to invest internally, have someone be working on those things versus working on something like the actual drawings of these buildings or designing these buildings. And I think on another level, that's maybe why people come to us for these images. They see the work we do. Say like, I I don't really promote the work we do so aggressively. We don't really have a website. Where we do have a website that have images, it's like you can see it in a kind of dimly lit room full of crates that they're kind of scattered about. Nonetheless, we keep seemingly getting clients, and I think it's a case of where the work speaks for itself, which is kind of the best case scenario.
I think 100%, as you mentioned, it requires a certain level of like understanding and even like research from your side. And so you don't end up making something like very stereotypical and kind of communicate the site itself very well. Yeah. Maybe you can move a little bit ahead or like talk about a little bit about your master's.
Okay, we can go through that, and we'll come back to some more technical and boring stuff to asking the questions. So Brandon, you did your undergrad in Manitoba. I think it's environmental design.
Yeah.
And then you came to U of T here to do your master's. And yeah, this comes back to what you showed us in Art 100, but you made some incredible renderings and went on a trip, like won some awards for all your work in master's here. So for those who don't know your master's, could you just maybe quickly explain what you did for it? We can
Sure. So I did a thesis here under John Schneer called Museum Ultimate Film. And as a departure to what I spoke about, architectural renderings are kind of just the means to get to a building, just like any form of architectural representation. It was a thesis group called Drawing as Thesis, where the topic was if you actually just take the discourse around these representations as the kind of end means in of itself to talk about architecture. It's not representation of something. It is the work of itself. And part of that was looking at the work of Museum, who did a series. We did all sorts, many drawings and etchings and prints, but in particular, ones we were looking at were these prison series, these kind of like prisons of the imagination. There's two editions of them, and they're kind of impossible architectures to them. They're very fantastical. In the context of this thesis group, where some people come to a thesis with a topic that they want to pursue in this about like a year prior or the summer prior. Thesis at the time started in the winter term. So I came with a place and I traveled. The previous summer I had a travel scholarship to travel through Norway. I was for this travel scholarship. I was traveling, researching the Norwegian tourist routes, series of kind of small projects done on Norwegian highways. And to get to the northern part of Norway, it kind of felt like there was two ways to get there. One, through a series of small local flights under a flight path, or I could fly way into the Arctic Circle to this archipelago called Svalbard, and then bounce off of that to get to the northern parts of Norway. And that became a kind of interesting thing to do. Didn't really know anything about Svalbard other than that there's a thing called the Global Seed Vault there, where they store kind of copies of all the world's seeds that in times of kind of calamity or like plant extinction, like there are seeds in storage. So I'm like, that's kind of an interesting place to go to. I'll stay there for 2 days. And I became very fascinated with this place. It's very strange and unusual. There's abandoned Soviet town there. It's administered by the country of Norway, but it is not a part of Norway because of like a League of Nations treaty. Different countries all have equal access rights to it. But more than anything, what I came to thesis with that it kind of seems like a canary in a coal mine when it comes to climate change. Not so long before we arrived, there was actually a landslide in the valley of the main town, the town called Longyearbyen, and it happened because climate change was affecting the Arctic kind of sooner than other parts of the world. And there's increased precipitation, the permafrost starting to kind of melt. So with that, it's just causing landslides. There's not a lot of like vegetation, like roots. There's not trees that are with roots that are holding parts of the ground together. So it's affecting the climate. Climate's affecting the place now, but it's also therefore it's a place where a lot of scientific research is happening about climate change. paradoxically, Norway at the time and Russia are mining coal there. So some of the kind of maybe like the dirtiest resource you can kind of pull from there is like happening like within like eye shot of where they're studying climate change. So it just seemed like an all around like very unusual place with lots of strange histories. This thing is happening. So I came to thesis with this place. What I ultimately produced was a series of images that attempted to kind of extrapolate the future of this archipelago in sometimes fantastical ways and depict it in the context of a natural history museum. In the kind of meta narratives of the thesis, it takes the position that maybe Svalbard doesn't exist in the future, that kind of Atlantean tale. And there were lots of kind of mythologies that were brought into the thesis as it just pertains to the Arctic, kind of generally, in the kind of history of imagining the Arctic. So there's kind of something tale that like the Arctic doesn't exist anymore, and we're looking back from that future point. So the future, looking backwards, is still a future today, and as a means of talking about climate change and kind of visualizing climate change through the kind of lens of the built environment, changes of the environment, in a way that talks about the various facets of change, but also provides maybe like another form of imagination change. The kind of classic kind of image of climate change in the Arctic is like a polar bear, like kind of out at sea at like a dwindling iceberg or something like that. Like maybe there's other ways we can kind of have an image of climate change. There's all in the lens of that museum, and that museum is presented in a state of incomplete. It's not a museum as a design of like, here's the layout of a museum. In fact, it like borrows a lot of I don't know, it's like typologies and museum design, like the diorama, but it presents the museum kind of like a diorama to the viewer of the image. Like a lot of the perspectives actually don't make any sense. So it's physical spaces. There's a lot of like impossible perspectives in subtle ways, not unlike the Piranesi reference I referenced earlier, that they're not outwardly like impossible architectures, but they are definitively images for the viewer, not as like a building that should be built.
Yeah, I remember some plays on scale and without perspective. Yeah, that'd be nice to get a picture for that to show
Flashing on the screen.
I love it when like this kind of thesis projects or research projects involve this sort of traveling, and then you hear all of these stories, and from just like in a few minutes you were able to the stories and how there's like different layers, and you were able to focus on specifically the climate change aspect as well. So just talking about this whole trip itself, I want to ask that like on a more general level, like how can trips to experience like these sites or architecture abroad can shape like one's understanding or even project itself? Like, you know, you initially started something else and then you ended up doing something else.
Yeah. And the way you end up representing those as well.
Yeah.
I suppose it's as a passive just learning from the world. I mean, as architecture students, it's like you learn about buildings. There's like precedents you learn about, but there's nothing quite like actually walking through a building and seeing it as a space, seeing it as a building that exists in a city, in a context. You have to get to it in some way. And, you know, for the thesis, yeah, I should say I didn't go to Svalbard with the expectation it was going to be my thesis. It kind of came later. But maybe also speaks to, you know, there's the inspiration in the world. And maybe there's like a facet to this where architecture school, it's very rigorous. It demands a lot of your time. You become very insular in a very insular community. And it is really good to find ways to get out of that, because ultimately, as practitioners, you're doing it for people that are not inner bubble, and it's always good to find ways to break out of that bubble. For the very same reason, I always tell students that are undergrad students thinking of going to grad school that you absolutely shouldn't take time off between undergrad and grad school, and be a human out in the world and experience the world for a little bit before you dive back in. So as a side plug on what the benefits of being out in the world.
Yeah.
100%. That's like a tip. Perhaps I wanted to hear right now. That is fine. I think I should take a break before I dive into my master's, as I'm like going to be graduating soon. And I was literally thinking about it that I came to UFT with all of these experiences from different places I live. And the 4 years I've only like given my whole time basically the studio and here. So if I go straight to masters, am I going to repeat the same things or do I need time to experience more things to get more? Right. So I think, thank you for that validation as well. That is fine. You didn't apply. It's okay.
I think your whole master's thesis having the focus on climate change or showing different parts of the world also speaks to the potential like vendors can have even from a ethical perspective or from a activist perspective, how renders can have an impact on society. So how do you view the role of renders, not just as a tool for architecture, but I say tool for art or change in the world, maybe not only the work you do, but also is the people that you live up to or who've inspired you along the way.
I perhaps have more like humble expectations about the kind of change anyone that thing can elicit, but
Yeah.
perhaps you know,
Your house.
drawing a form of representation is a form of like thinking through your projects and always finding ways to think deeply to the projects. I have to say, so my thesis, I did it in 2017, or sorry, 2018, and then it was kind of done, graduate across the stage, go and practice. Several years later, get asked to contribute to a book, and so it was an opportunity to actually you revisit a lot of this stuff. And a couple of years had gone by, and as I was like even just researching, I was revisiting the images, we were revisiting the text, right, and it come to an essay. And it was kind of interesting at how some of the parts of the thesis kind of felt like they even came more to fruition than they were at the time. So like one of the narratives, like I spoke about going to the town of Longyearbyen, there's a landslide. And there had been previous landslides that actually destroyed some of the houses. And in the narrative, the entire town rebuilds itself into like one superstructure at the center of the valley on stilts to kind of avoid maybe like a forthcoming kind of flood of the valley. And this has since happened since. They are actually starting to move some of the buildings, and not in maybe such a fantastical way, but in a news article, first I'll say in the narrative, there was a kind of line from the governor of the town, from Bordeaux, who in our narrative, it's like literally written out, we cannot trust the permafrost anymore. That was like a declarative statement that kind of kicks off this particular narrative. And when researching currently, we're talking like a news article where the governor says almost explicitly the same thing, where it was in those terms, the permafrost made me trust it anymore. Like it was the word trust in those terms, and it was like almost kind of sad, like how much that can't be true. And I don't think the images are in the kind of grand scheme of things kind of being used causing change, but I think it's still important to kind of be a part of that discourse and kind of find you use images in a way that feels kind of important to me, especially a lot of the other images are for clients. They kind of often will dictate the terms, and it was nice to kind of revisit some of that was images about that are for images and have a kind of purpose that feels it is relevant.
Yeah, I think for me at least, there's a lot to say about just looking at the pictures and issuing things deeply about the narratives, and the representations. Yeah, and seeing that people are also being conscious, at least acknowledging these narratives in the renders is quite powerful.
Yeah.
But for your thesis, you won in 2019 the Canadian Architect Student Award of Excellence for your thesis project.
Sorry.
So how was that?
and sell how awesome it is so that we can all know.
Yeah, very very exciting. I mean, the Canadian Architect Awards is like Architect Magazine, is a Canadian magazine. They have their awards issue year where, well, one, it celebrates forthcoming architecture, but they have the student prize, and I submitted it for the student prize. And yes, one, very, very excited to receive a student prize, but actually maybe more than anything that was very exciting was that the image I spoke about, the town being lifted up on stilts, actually made the cover of that magazine. And as far as I know, it was the first time the student award was the one that made the cover. Normally it's the other architects awards, ones that chosen from making the cover. So yeah, very excited to receive that line. When a friend texted me the cover, because I didn't actually work at an architecture, or I wasn't even, it's given out to architecture offices freely. They received it and sent me a text of the picture of it on the cover. So what can I say?
Now, this is the question I was really excited for.
Okay.
I subtly mentioned it before that I've been waiting for this question so I can ask more deeply about an award itself. And we have asked this question to our guests who came before as well. Then how do you approach these awards? Are these like sort of a validation for, yeah, I'm doing something right? Or are there a goal? Or there's something else behind it?
I mean, nice to win an award, right? Nice to get the recognition. I am not a marketing person. I've already spoken. We don't have a website really. We went like 3 years where we didn't post anything on Instagram. I'm trying to get back into that, to the habit of how we reimagined our work for that. Recognition is value. I'm like a one that gets excited when I win things for our clients. So when I'm also doing images for the same batch of awards and get asked to do images for that, I take it as a personal win when I am part of our clients winning awards. I maybe also, in a way that I shouldn't, take it as like a personal failing when a client doesn't win an award. In a way that I shouldn't be responsible for those things. But it is maybe a peculiar way that I attribute those kind of things more to the client piecing work than I do our own personal work. Maybe because I'm also like a person that just takes I take a lot of pleasure in making images. I really like doing it. I really like the process, and I do it for myself more than I do it. Like some of the things I really get into are more from myself. So maybe there's also like a sense of like, I think there's also a part, I feel like the best work is the work I'm doing right now. And when I look at work like a year ago, I'm getting some better. And like now, like that would be the thing that's maybe, getting the recognition just by nature of the way things actually get released. Sometimes they do images and they don't see the light of day for sometimes years.
I think when you're passionate about something, it's just inevitable to feel that way. Like you do end up feeling that way.
Yeah, and for these insane projects that take so much work, I feel like you need that passion. I also, but it's awesome to see that you still smile about your work, and despite all that the effort and the troubles actually go through. So moving along, in this point in your life, you graduated and you won this massive award. So as someone who's looking to specialize in renders even more broadly, what can people expect as job and work opportunities, and how did that translate in your career?
In terms of like doing renderings explicitly, I think it can be a valuable skill set. I think, as those you go off into practice, you start to realize that practice is not all architecture school chalked it up to be, for better or worse. Like the realities, like a studio project is something grind over for about 3 months. You get the brief to it being the thing you're presenting to a row of juries, something that's very fast paced. You turn over ideas very quickly, and architecture is like a very, very long process that it goes through all sorts of cycles. I think, to do renderings as a skill set in an office can have a lot of value. As I kind of spoke to already, that my working in an office, it became a very integral way of being a part of the design process. I should say, as different students had to find different parts of the profession that they like. I have a friend who she only likes doing contract documents is the part I enjoy the least. And to do architecture rendering specifically as a niche thing that I do right now, is a tricky thing. I think maybe for two reasons. I think for one, the kind of wave I still caught were that the kind of expectations of outsourced endpoints were still somewhat low when I got started. To do really elaborate render, I was computers weren't there, the asset libraries weren't there. When I first was working on rendering in an office for competition, really find polish rendering as best I could do at the time to hit render. I would then wait till the next day for that data because you're working on 2 gigabytes of RAM on pretty weak CPUs and GPUs at the time, and it wouldn't even be an elaborate scene. And so, then it's I rendered it, I'm not gonna re-render it at all. We'll just Photoshop and fix exactly here. In times, computing power have changed, expectations around renderings have changed, how fast things you can do have changed. So it is a really steep learning curve to get to the level. I think can be, I don't know if acceptable is the right word, but we'll say what my own clients expect of me has a lot higher. There, I look at work from 2 years ago. I'm our clients would not accept this as acceptable work today. Different jobs have different levels of expectations too, but it is a high bar to get there. And it is something that you do have to be. You say you have to be a little bit of a nerd about renderings, because it's not something that's really taught in school. It's maybe kind of loosely that you can hear as Rhino, and maybe you just have to turn off the sun at most. AALD brought me to do just that one a couple of years back, but certainly not get into the weeds. At most, you can kind of expect to Photoshop textures on in lieu of libraries like tree, they're not 3D models, and maybe just cutouts that you find online. And there is also the AI of it all, which is the kind of new thing.
You can definitely get into AI.
100%, something we do want to talk about, but it's not it's before we move on to a different question. This
foreshadowing future topics.
You mentioned so many interesting stuff. I just wanted to know as a student, because I've experienced this a lot. Maybe were you a student at some point, or you had to deliver a deadline and to show a client something, and imagine yourself at the time that there was this the computers were not that advanced and the RAM is low and everything. Have you ever experienced a technical difficulty, this one experience that always happened with you now that you are I can't do it?
The technical difficulties that as a starting to freelance out of school became all the more stressful than when I was a student. As a student, when I was not the old building, my little secret was that at the time of rendering them, I would I don't have a computer on my laptop, but there are 20 computers in this building that have V8 installed in them. And I can just go around and find out the IP address of every single one of those computers, plug them into the distributed rendering of my laptop, and just have my file, have all the computers in the building, help render this thing on my laptop. So, and then I would just have those locked in. So to all my fellow students who were wondering why the computers were bad, it's because they were actually all in my files. And that was really very powerful to have that. But I didn't understand that was just then starting to freelance. It'd be very stressful because you'd be working, someone's hiring you to work on this competition, and it's they want to win this competition. It's very serious, and they're trying to do these rendering, but now once you gear my capabilities are so much different, and all you can do is
Job.
do or die, kind of. But like clients do not care about your technical difficulties. They don't care that your computer is crashing. Like you have to deliver, and it is like a very sobering challenge to be in when you feel the pressure, the deadline. It's not like the pressure, you see pressure to deliver in the studio, but like if I have one render less, or the rendering not even as good, I'm already pushing renders further than what is expected of me. Stakes are therefore low in the way they weren't for clients. Those are kinds of technical difficulties you do. I don't know that I have like true cases, but there have definitely been like some moments where it feels very, very stressful.
I'm stressed right now.
I actually, like things are a little bit more like stabilized, have more like powerful computers. Computers just generally more powerful. There's ways to work through those limitations. And the technical feats seem more self-imposed these days than anything.
Yeah.
Sometimes the technical difficulty is now just like the foreshadow topic. Like I'm in the middle of winter, I'm supposed to do aerial rendering, I'm taking a drone shot, so it has to show all these complex buildings as they are. But the client will, without question, will only accept a summer rendering as my deliverable. But it is winter. How do I do that? Within a kind of reasonable amount of means. Short, I was recreating a very large part of the city at 3.
And you have to finish the render ahead of the deadline so that you can still have time to render the finish. So coming back to our discussion earlier, we're talking about just architectural renderings in the first place. We're talking about the narrative and the stylization versus the realism and your renders. We talked about this with Jeffrey and Ben, and I was in your Art 100 studio. We talked about moments to make the viewer smile. Specific details that are specific to the render, obviously, but just add that little extra personality. Or sometimes obscure, but when you take the time to look at them, it just shows the profoundness of the artistry. So in your renders, how do you come up with these narratives, especially if it's just client work, which has to be, I guess, more standardized?
Sure.
But how do you come up with the narratives or these moments in your renderings? Idea from a narrative perspective, and then that ties into how you write about them, because I know in the scaffold journal, for example, you spend a lot of time writing and verbalizing elements of the render.
So there are 2 questions. One is like client-facing side, one's our own side. Okay, so we'll start with the client side. When I first started getting into rendering, the kind of expected workflow was often you deliver a full series of views to clients that were all rendered in all white.
Okay.
And I found that very limiting. For one, because I always thought there would be like great images, but like when the only criteria is like what I see in the image, not how it feels, not how it's animated, not how minute it is. They'll only decide what scene to use. And I remember a particular project, there was a museum, the science center in Thunder Bay, the shore. The roof had this kind of folded to it. I really wanted to make an image. It was taken from the water in winter where they have this like phenomenon where the ice crashes against the shore and it's like super blue. People go out into the ice and it was like, it'd be so great to have this like vignette that you saw the roof line and it's like all blown out of light and you see the ice crashing against the shore. It's a rift in the ice. It was like a really hard time explain to kind of why we wanted this image because they already had the expectation of like we made this view, this view, and this view, and this view, such as they do in the past. So I just like made a version of the image. I was like kind of halfway there. I tried to 3D quality ice and everything they best I could. I eventually got them on board and then found like photos to do it. And I just started to think like, what if I just did the images I wanted to do up front, and then let them decide if they want it or not. At least I like showed it to them first, and it wasn't left in their imagination and not me trying to like explain like it's straight. So I do views. We deliver them as mock-ups, and the idea is that if you look at them like a little thumbnails, they look as like almost complete renderings. There's maybe a bit of photo bashing and a little bit of brush, but the intentions are like 100% there. I don't have to explain why I think it's a great image. They should be able to see it. And from there, we have got more success, I think, on like in clandestine images that I'm excited about. There's maybe the question like how I think through it's like some of the narratives, and they always kind of vary how I approach images. Sometimes I get influenced by treating things, like there was one we did that was like totally face up, we were talking splash and like to design a building. It had the right tone, the sky, and there was a pool. It was all lined up to reference that paint reflection screen. There was like another one I did for Chris Porcelli here, which referenced Marriott with the people at the bar. I remember we had a bar, but like the composition is there. I think people when they know that painting, they like totally see it. Other images, I think about like who the characters are. Just recently, doing like a greenhouse in like rural Ontario. There's a greenhouse lab, and it's like we need to like people. I was talking to a guy on Hopper. He's a guy that's like looks like he grew up on the farm, slinging pig shit, but like now he's like super into tech and like he owns a drone and he like works in the science lab. Like he knows what it's like to work on a farm. Like, we need a person that feels like that. So it can't just be like go on to Shutterstock and find the lab people and they're all looking at test tubes like that. Like they're not the right vibe. Yeah. So there's always just this like layers of just thinking through what things are. When it comes to our own work, there was always this sense like, do people care about the conversations we do? Like we just put like all our projects on. Like maybe they do. I don't even know that I like want to see our work that way. And so we're like office in search of. Like what are we in search of? Are we even like a real office? We're not an architecture office. We're not a license. We just kind of do these competitions and we like sometimes we revisit them because we think there's an idea there we wanted to do. What if there's like a flavor to how I approached like the thesis work where we kind of reimagine all our work as like a body of work that exists in the OISO archive. This is really what it is. It's like our archive is what we call our hard drive. It's really like OISO underscore archive. That's where it all exists. But what if that was like actually like a real place that can be imagined? And we for the scaffold journal, we're like this idea like what if we like all these things were like re-impacting these competitions we did 10 years ago. There's like competitions that were done years apart, but they were both in Iceland, and now they're like in this Icelandic room together. We put them side by side on that. Things are kind of like partially draped on charts. And what if we write about it like we actually don't even know what these projects are? Which had a kind of analog to this piece about John Stone's museum, or was this piece was like he wrote about his own museum before it was finished. From the future that it was a ruin. It was like maybe all these people like traveling through his museum, like wondering what the museum was about. And we were like, what if we were thinking about our work in that way? Like we don't actually talk about it like because we actually know what the concept statements are. That's maybe more like fascinating to think about as like an outsider. Imagine what that outsider thinks these things are supposed to be.
Yeah.
And add a kind of meta narrative that kind of ties our whole body of work together and gives it this like overlay of a fiction, and that kind of was to kind of build up in our like Instagram that there's like these spaces that were render. I'm not just posting our renders to the Instagram. Like the renders are like printed out or like on canvas, and they're like amongst artifacts. Like we did a competition with Chris Porcelli in Norway, and it was like, here's a mock-up of the cladding amongst the renderings. Not that we ever actually made a mock-up of the cladding, but speaks to like a discourse of our process with Chris, where we actually just rendered up. We tested so many different cladding options that we might as well have mocked up because we got so into the grain of like how the wood grain of the concrete should actually look when it should appear as an image. It might as well have been real. So we pretend it's real. More kind of fiction.
And right now, are you referencing the picture that's on your website, all the rates? And
well, there's that one we've been just posting recently, like in the last 2 days on our Instagram, like this kind of more way. So, but if there's 2 images, there'll be a third one soon. We'll like actually form a full triptych, but when you swipe into it, you kind of see like more of the work.
Probably some of this, something.
Get some of those.
Yeah, it's like me.
Yeah,
It's
right.
just like you're
Flash on the screen.
That's just 100%. Just to touch a little bit upon this another aspect of your life that we quite a lot about the renders, Office in Search of, but you are also an instructor at Daniels. And we were really wondering how did you like end up in this space, and why does teaching matter to you on top of all of this work you have been doing?
Jeff, he 100% is the academic of the two of us, but no stranger coming into his reviews for him. And I thought it was something I wanted to try. I had, in the kind of context where I first thought, I had quit my day job, having an office, to kind of fully pursue rendering. We also had a competition exhibit piece in Korea, and I was thought like maybe this is like to kind of flesh out. I should try teaching. It was kind of one of these cases like, well, I'll just apply. There's sessional postings. Like the worst I can say is like I'm out of experience or something. And I was fortunate enough to be hired to teach in the drawing and representation class. You know, like I'm obviously drawing and representation is a big thing what I do, and I have really enjoyed teaching that class because as it kind of builds up the curriculum, he gets very much into thinking kind of fantastical narratives about these like spaces of the city, and I have a lot of fun just doing it. And they keep bringing me back, so I think I must be doing something right.
100%.
I can vouch for that.
Yeah, your students have
Yes.
that they enjoy your class, and there's a lot going from your experiences as well.
Okay, so for myself, I'm very curious about this because I have been pushing to use Blender in my projects because I know Blender has a very high ceiling, like you're talking about. Blender can do so many things, including architectural visualization. And because of that, you can take the ArcViz to the next level. Definitely, as we can see in your words. So, and what you told me today is like actually you just done this switch to Blender in the last 2-3 years.
Something like that. So there was kind of a transition.
Yeah.
As we could feel that we could reliably do it
Yeah.
without it seeming like we skipped a beat in our output.
Blender has a strong learning curve as well. But why Blender for you?
I was a little bit of a weirdo in my time where I was a SketchUp user as a student, SketchUp and V-Ray. I first learned V-Ray through 3ds Max. It sounds so old, but when I learned that, it was like a book that came with a CD-ROM that had the assets on it, and I was like, that's how you learned 3ds Max at the time. I adopted viewing it in the SketchUp, so I just tightened the workflow of like design to rendering. I could kind of just work it all in one, so I didn't have to go with 3ds Max. But I eventually felt like I was encountering a ceiling, the kind of niche things I wanted to do. V-Ray and SketchUp both have Rhino and SketchUp both have the same kind of version of V-Ray that is a little bit more reduced. It's not like a node-based way to assemble materials, kind of like node-based being like Rexhopper. Like it's all kind of input the slots. You can't like layer in things very easily. You can't build things up like a lot of procedural ways that, you know, it's not just one picture repeating itself. You can have something kind of cover an entire building and not be repeated ever. The reason for what I was kind of averse to going to 3ds Max, just like everything was so costly, or that's just being this giant, kind of averse to that. And my friend who was kind of potentially freelance, Mike Yoshimura, he comes from ArcViz, but has sort of veered more into the concept art world, and he would use it. And for some projects we collaborate on, it was a case where he would do these renderings, Blender, and I would do like matte painting, like Photoshop it over it, colors and things, and that was how we collaborated. As he wanted to get out of ArcViz, there were some projects where it was like the client wanted updates to the renderer, but the files were in a software I didn't know how to use, and when he wanted to get out of it, and he was also definitely going to be on vacation, and so he would be able to do it for me. So there was maybe another kind of do or die moment where I have to learn how to use the software to be able to like update these renderings without explaining to the client I actually don't know how to use the software that the rendering was done in, which would be kind of outlandish. So I would literally like at night, I'd be like making dinner and be like watching like Blender tutorials. But I fell in love with Blender pretty quickly because it's a very creator-focused software. It's an open source software. People make branches of the software, but it is free and it really favors creators doing it with it. There are lots of very novel add-ons people make for it that can do all sorts of really amazing, fantastical things, and especially because it's not really a software used commonly in architecture, it's used in other things. That there's all sorts of strange add-ons people will make that have all sorts of kind of interesting use of especially when it comes to concept art. Like there's a tool we use where you can literally just draw a curve and it will completely generate a three-dimensional river with rocks, and it's animated that it will splash as the things just rock. Like it is like someone who knows Grasshopper, but a way more complicated version, which is Blender called Geometry Node, that can just produce like the most amazing, fantastical things kind of automatically, and you can start to kind of piece a lot of those things with all the things you want to do, and it just kind of makes you
Sounds efficient as well.
Yeah.
We think about it.
Can be, yeah.
Quite complicated as well.
Yeah.
It is, all softwares have one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talking about that, since Blender is not ArcViz specifically,
Yeah.
but it has all these possibilities, just quickly, do you think Blender will be the ArcViz software of the future?
I think it's like a tricky thing because it's not really great at model and architecture. Like you can't like run and just draw your floor plan and build it up. There are dimensions to it, but it's not a software that like wants you to work in very measured ways. Or when you can, it just feels like it's doing it in a very tedious and challenging ways. There are add-ons that add functionality and CAD-like functionality. There's add-ons that add BIM-like functionality. Do I think it's the future of ArcViz? I don't know. Maybe because that's the segue to what is AI.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%. Talking about AI, how do you feel about AI taking over? And do you think in your profession, instead of threat as a render artist?
Yeah, like 100%. But I think it's a threat to all creative disciplines. I think there is no person that works in the creative industry that right now that doesn't feel the presence of AI. In music, you read commercial music for things. You can just generate music, and it sounds pretty good. If you're in products, you can just make a whole product campaign in AI, click of a button. And what does this all mean? 100% I'm an answer for you.
So, like, in that case, do you think it's worth for students to learn like such a complicated software when AI is becoming so reliable?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like asking, is there value in making music when AI can make music? Like, if you're thinking about music, yeah, like 100% you should be invested in these things. Because I think to the people who make these tools, I don't think they appreciate that there's like pleasure in making things and doing things and learning things. So I was watching a podcast with Espan, like a guy like Anthropic, and he was like, "Oh, you could just like go to Berlin and like have your AI agents do all this research for you, come back and have all these reports for you, and like, but maybe there's actually like a joy in learning things and not have it like pre-filtered for you, that you find things unexpected ways when you go to the library." It's like you think you're going for one book and then you see all these like other books around it, and it's like, oh, I actually have this book and this book. But you know, AI's not really like good at that. It maybe like one either hallucinates it or just too sycophantic and wants to just give you what you want, and not stray off the beaten path.
Either.
So I think 100% you should still learn these tools, even if it's not your goal to be like a fully AI artist, because just like, you know, if you can imagine the AI that can do floor plans, and there are AIs that endeavor to do such things, there's still a kind of a joy, but like a process and a form of thinking that happens, and you actually just take time to think through a plan and work through the problems and the forces that act on why a design might be this way or why that way, and kind of manifest that for yourself. So renderings to think through a design potential and not take not have these shortcuts. For sure, tools have use, just like for sure you can have Gemini or ChatGPT write your essay for you, and it does the job, but it's kind of, like astronauts, they go out to space, it's like all anti-gravity. But it's like, it's actually like really bad for your body to be in anti-gravity for too long. They kind of like, they're like your bone marrow like decreases, and it's like, it's not healthy to be in a kind of frictionless world without kind of creative limitations like that for too long. And if you let yourself, like it feels so easy to use these tools, and it like helps do something maybe when there feels like an urgency to get something done. And I think there's like a sense with people who are very like even use AI like in some degree. Everyone kind of feels like they're using the AI the right amount. People who use AI too little are like missing out, and other people use AI too much. And like no one has the answer. Creatives will say like you're using it. It's like a sin to use it. But then like the developers of the world are like happy to just see like things like manifest instantly. And
But it's right.
there's a kind of tension to it
It's a whole
Yeah.
debate.
that we don't know how. But we had like a 2-hour chat about this morning, how we approach it in our own office.
Yeah, it's clear that you put a lot of thought into this, and especially the analogy with the astronaut. I'm curious that meeting social means just even in human.
Well, I think that like, so I saw a stat that I think like 70% of all content on social media now is AI generated. And you just like think like how AI is good, and like, Instagram, like I was like an undergrad student on Instagram, and now 75% of it is AI. Like, what is any image value when there's just so much of it? And that's like a really hard thing to grapple. What the true weight of anything is. There's just so much of it.
Yeah, so much to think about, but I think that the main point that we can take is students keep doing your renders. But
Pursue the path of like learning. There may be another analogy for you. There was, I don't know who it was, because I don't remember who, but there was like a chef who talked about doing things the long, hard, stupid way in his restaurant. It was like they had this like whole like a fish dish where they like come out and present this like dish to the like people, and like then it was like, I think it was like chicken. It was like, here's like the chicken, and that not like the chicken, but it got prepared in like multiple ways. It was like then they like broke it apart, and then they like made a dish with it, it got served, and then like they made like a stock out of it, and now it got served. And the people at the chef were like, oh, we could just like show them a chicken, but like actually have everything prepared. And it was like, no, like you gotta do things the long, hard, stupid way, because that's the way the things we do is me.
Yeah.
Maybe the other like analogy, like I also heard this story once. It was like about like it was like a parable where the design, I only know who a designer talked to you about in the context, and this was like years before AI. And he talked about like design. Yeah, the things, there's like an aura around design that goes beyond the like commerce of it and the like actual product of design, because it's so easy to talk about design. If you like, there are marketing people who call their buildings the product. And he was using a story from like Japan where there was this poor like, it's like poor boy who would like only could afford rice, and he like lived above like a fish shop, like at an inn, and he would eat his rice at the like window when the restaurant was cooking, so he could smell the food of the restaurant while he ate his rice, and there was like that smell like enhanced what he ate. The designer talked about, like, that was a kind of like aura that like exists around design. It was like goes beyond what you're actually having. That like the designer behind it, like something else, gives a kind of presence to the work. The story goes on. I mentioned the innkeeper finds out about this boy smelling the food, and he takes them to like the magistrate, and he's like, "This boy has been stealing the smell of my fish." And like apparently this like magistrate like have all these like unusual rulings. He like ponders this case, and he's like, "Boy, like, how much money do you have?" And he's like, "I have so little. There's like these 2 coins. If I give these coins away, like I won't be able to like afford my rice." And so the magistrate says like, "Okay, I want you to do this. Like, I want you to take the coins and like drop them into your hand." And then he does so, and they kind of blink into 10. The magistrate goes like, "Oh, the case is settled." And the innkeeper is like outraged, and he's like, "How can this be? Like, you didn't do anything, and you were, and the magistrate. It was like one of these like things, like almost clever comebacks. You always think about in your head, like never happened to the magistrate said something to the effect of like this: the smell of your fish has been paid by the sound of his money. And the designer talked about like, oh, like this is like like there's so much more like beyond the commerce of it all.
Yeah.
And I kind of think about like the story that was not about AI, like even the world of AI, and like all the reason to kind of reinforce the kind of presence of collaborators in this work, even though there's not like a commerce to it. Well, it is commerce, but like not take to kind of easy paths.
Yeah,
A long-winded answer and full of stories.
definitely.
That's quite a very like stories with moral. I love that. Okay. We can maybe move on to closing, but I do want to ask the team if you guys have any questions which you guys wanted to ask. Well, if not, then we can just yeah.
Brandon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's a great discussion.
My pleasure.
What the reactions are from all these rendering future render experts in the architectural communities here. But also there's so much to just about representation, and so much for sharing. Where can people find you if they have questions? If you just want to promote any
You can find us on @Office ISO on Instagram. I will you can DM me. I'll happily respond to things. If you see me around the building when I do teach in the fall,
yeah.
you can talk to me about that. If you see Jeff in the halls and you talk to him about renderings, he's not going to know what to talk about because he doesn't do those.
Okay.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. It was great having you today, and we enjoyed the conversation so much. I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you.
That was our discussion with Brandon Bergem on the art of architectural visualization.
Thanks to our team, Kushi, Janice, Alejandra, Nathania, Matt, of course, and Kyla for bringing this together. You can find us on Instagram, Spotify, YouTube, maybe Facebook. Thank you.